the presenters on every news channel were saying injured but expected to make a full recovery, and I have no idea why, but it made me so angry.
Princess Diana's sister, Lady Sarah McCorquodale, has finally spoken out at age 60, confirming long-rumored secrets about Diana's final days. She revealed details the palace never addressed, including why Diana wasn't wearing a seatbelt and her fear of being watched. If Sarah's claims are true, what happened in Paris might not be what we've always believed. Long before the headlines, before Diana became the world's most photographed woman, there was Sarah. Lady Elizabeth Sarah Lavinia McCorquodale, born March 19, 1955, the first daughter of the Spencer family and 6 years Diana's senior. She wasn't just Diana's sister. She was her guide, her protector, the one who held her hand through the wreckage of their childhood. And now, at 60, she's the one bringing the questions back to life. The Spencer household was no fairy tale. Their parents, John Spencer and Frances Shand Kidd, had a marriage filled with tension, distance, and eventually complete collapse. When they divorced in 1969, Diana was just 7. Their mother left, quickly remarried, and lost custody of all 4 children after a brutal legal battle. Sarah, the eldest, was left to help hold the family together. She became the buffer between their cold father and the chaos of a broken home. And for Diana, Sarah was more than just a big sister. She was safety. They grew up at Park House, on the Queen's Sandringham estate, in close orbit of the royal family, but far removed from any emotional warmth. Their lives were structured, privileged, but cold. The kind of upbringing that produces obedience, not trust. While Jane, the middle sister, kept to herself, it was Sarah who became the emotional scaffolding for Diana. She helped her navigate their father's cold rule, their stepmother's presence, and the deep instability that followed them into adolescence. By the time Sarah married Neil McCorquodale, a distant relative of Winston Churchill, she had already assumed the quiet role of family anchor. She had 3 children, kept to tradition, and stayed far from the spotlight. But even in her silence, Sarah remained woven into Diana's world. She was there for the big moments, the wedding, the royal visits, the quiet breakdowns no one else saw. And yet, her role wasn't passive. In 1977, it was Sarah who brought Prince Charles into their lives. He came to Althorp for a hunting weekend. Diana was 16. Charles wasn't looking at Diana then. He was dating Sarah. But what began as a visit between adults turned into a history-altering introduction. For decades, Sarah kept her distance from the media. She didn't speak out. She didn't correct the narratives. But now, the silence has broken. She's speaking about Diana, about that night, about the fear. And when a sister who once kept everything buried suddenly decides to tell the truth, it makes people wonder what she's been holding in for all these years. Diana didn't grow up planning to wear a crown. She didn't rehearse curtsies or dream about royal weddings. She wanted love, something real, something that didn't come with titles or public duty. But life didn't give her that option. Her childhood was fractured from the start. Her parents' divorce left a permanent scar. And by the time she was 9, Diana had already learned how to hide pain behind a smile. She was homeschooled at first, mostly raised by nannies and a rotating cast of caretakers, and only started formal schooling when her father thought she was old enough to be sent away. She never thrived in the classroom, but she found joy in the in-between places, playing piano, dancing, swimming, trying to carve out moments of control in a life that felt dictated by others. At West Heath Girls' School, Diana started to come into her own. She wasn't top of her class, but she had something most of the others didn't: empathy. She won awards for community spirit, for kindness, for simply being someone who paid attention. People trusted her. They opened up to her. And that never stopped, even after the world started watching. By 16, Diana had moved to London and was trying to live a normal life. If there ever was such a thing for a Spencer. She shared a flat with friends, worked as a nanny and a preschool assistant, and took public transport like everyone else. She wasn't chasing fame, she was chasing freedom. For once, she wanted to make her own choices, and for a brief moment, she did. But even then, people noticed her, not just for her looks, but for her warmth. She made strangers feel like friends. She wasn't trying to impress, she was just present. That's what made her different. And then came Charles. It wasn't love at first sight. It wasn't even a real courtship. It was timing, logistics, aristocratic matchmaking. Diana was young, beautiful, and came from the right background. To the crown, that was enough. They weren't looking for a partner for Charles, they were looking for a symbol. And Diana fit the mold. She wasn't ready, but no one asked if she was. And once the spotlight hit her, there was no stepping back. The girl who had only ever wanted love was suddenly being prepared to stand next to the future king. She had no idea she'd spend the rest of her life being compared, watched, and dissected. It's the twist in the story that still makes people uncomfortable. Before Diana, Charles dated her sister. Lady Sarah Spencer and Prince Charles were briefly involved in the late 70s, years before Diana would ever wear the ring. Their courtship was quiet, appropriate, and uneventful. But the moment Charles ended up at Althorpe for a weekend hunt, everything changed. Diana was just a teenager when Charles first noticed her, 16 to be exact. Sarah had brought him there. It was all routine for her, part of the social circles they moved in. But what wasn't routine was the way Charles looked at Diana that day. From that moment on, everything started to shift. Sarah would later tell the press she'd never marry Charles. "I wouldn't marry anyone I didn't love," she said, "even if he were the King of England." It was a bold statement, but also a telling one. She saw something, or maybe she just felt nothing. Either way, she walked away. But instead of closing that chapter, she handed it off to Diana. What followed wasn't a love story. It was a transition. Charles needed a bride. The monarchy needed stability. And Diana, naive, sweet, and totally unprepared, fit the role perfectly. 13 meetings. That's all it took before they were engaged. 13 meetings between a 19-year-old girl and a man nearly 13 years her senior. Sarah was there the whole time, watching, smiling in the engagement photos, standing at the wedding, supporting her sister as the crown slowly consumed her. Did she know what Charles was really like? Did she see what was coming? Or did she think Diana was strong enough to survive it? That's the question people keep asking. Because what started as an innocent introduction soon became something irreversible. Diana wasn't just stepping into a marriage, she was stepping into a system. One that didn't care about her voice, her feelings, or her future. Sarah never spoke publicly about what she saw during those early years. She played her role, stayed quiet, but silence doesn't erase responsibility. And now, as she finally chooses to speak, it's hard not to see the weight she's been carrying. This wasn't just royal drama. This was family. And Sarah, whether she meant to or not, helped set it all in motion. The engagement was announced in February 1981. Diana was just 19, barely out of school, still working as a nursery assistant, still learning who she was, but suddenly she was front-page news. Britain's future queen. The shy girl who had captured the heir to the throne. The public loved it. The media couldn't get enough. And Diana, sweet, unsure Diana, was swept into it like a tide she couldn't fight. Almost overnight, her entire world changed. She moved into Clarence House, then Buckingham Palace. Her flatmates were gone. Her job, over. She was now Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales in waiting. But behind the glamour, something felt off. The palace wasn't a home, it was a machine. Cold, strict, suffocating. She was given royal tutors, wardrobe advisors, etiquette guides, but no one ever taught her how to survive it emotionally. No one prepared her for the loneliness. Still, she smiled. For the cameras, for the country, for the fairy tale they all wanted to believe in. On July 29, 1981, she walked down the aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral in front of 3,500 guests and nearly 1 billion viewers worldwide. The dress was massive, the veil even longer. Her eyes were glassy, her smile frozen. Charles barely looked at her, but it didn't matter because the spectacle was perfect. She became Princess Diana that day, but she lost Diana Spencer, and the reality of royal life hit fast. Within weeks, she was expected to act, speak, and carry herself like a seasoned royal. state dinners, press appearances, charity events, foreign tours. Every word scrutinized, every move watched. She had no margin for error and no time to find her footing. The public adored her, and the palace took advantage of that. Diana quickly became their greatest asset. She had what the others didn't: authenticity. People felt seen by her, loved by her. When she shook hands, it wasn't protocol, it was personal, and it terrified the institution. Her popularity outshined the very system she married into. But behind palace walls, she was struggling, isolated, confused, and slowly realizing that the man she married wasn't the fairy tale prince he appeared to be. Charles was distant, cold, still emotionally tied to Camilla. Diana could sense it, even if no one said it aloud. The marriage had barely begun, and already the cracks were forming. She had fulfilled her duty. She had given them the spectacle, the air, the headlines. But what she never got in return was love. The wedding was barely over before the illusion began to crumble. Behind the carriage rides and balcony kisses, behind the headlines that called her the people's princess, Diana was alone. Not just emotionally, physically. The palace was cold, staff were distant, and Charles was absent. He wasn't cruel in the way most imagine. He was worse, detached, polite, professional, but emotionally unreachable. He kept his world wrapped in duty, routine, and Camilla. At first, Diana tried to believe it was just pressure, just nerves, that he'd open up once they settled into married life. But weeks passed, then months, and the distance never closed. Charles had a rhythm she wasn't invited into. He kept to his schedule, his friends, his old life. Camilla never disappeared. She was always there, at events, in conversation, in the spaces between. Diana noticed. Everyone did. But no one said anything. Not to her. The silence was deafening. No one warned her that royal life was a performance you were never allowed to stop giving. She was applauded in public, adored by the press, but behind palace doors, she was invisible. The more the public loved her, the more the family seemed to pull back. It was as if her popularity had become a threat. Even early on, the cracks were visible. Charles once famously responded to a reporter's question about love with the now infamous line, "Whatever in love means." Diana had answered quickly, "Of course," but his words hit her like a warning. She knew then that something was missing. Not just affection, but intention. She was married to a man who never truly chose her. And the reality got worse with time. Charles wasn't trying to build a marriage. He was maintaining a structure, something respectable, something that photographed well. But Diana didn't want a role. She wanted a relationship, and every time she reached for connection, he slipped further away. There were moments she tried to confront it, moments she brought up Camilla, but nothing changed. The royal machine kept turning, and Diana was expected to keep smiling. So she did, at charity events, at royal dinners, in front of the cameras. But inside, she was breaking. Sarah saw it, the staff saw it. Even the press, at times, saw glimpses, but no one intervened. Because in the royal world, suffering is not a crisis, it's a footnote, and appearances must be preserved at all costs. Diana wasn't just fighting for love anymore, she was fighting to keep herself from disappearing. On the outside, she was flawless, graceful, radiant, every inch the royal dream. But behind closed doors, Diana was falling apart, slowly, silently. The pressure to be perfect was suffocating, and no one in the palace seemed to notice or care. She was drowning in expectations, in scrutiny, in isolation, and eventually her pain turned inward. Diana developed bulimia early into her marriage. She later admitted it began right after Charles made an offhand comment about her figure. Just a few words. That's all it took. And from that moment, the cycle began. Binge, guilt, purge, repeat. It wasn't about vanity, it was about control. In a world where everything was scripted, this was the one thing she could control. Her body, her pain, her shame, but the disorder didn't stay hidden for long. The palace knew, the staff noticed, even the press whispered about it. Still, no one offered help. There were no interventions, no support, just quiet judgment and carefully curated denial. Diana had become a symbol, and symbols aren't allowed to shatter. She tried to keep going. She smiled through engagements, held babies on camera, waved at crowds. But inside, she was collapsing. The loneliness in that palace was unbearable. Surrounded by people, but profoundly alone. Every moment was watched, every flaw noted. She didn't just feel unlovable, she felt invisible. Her emotional state spiraled. Postnatal depression after William's birth hit her hard. She tried to explain it. She even begged for help, but the palace brushed it off as weakness. Royals don't get depressed. Royals don't cry. Royals carry on. Diana began self-harming in private, not for attention, but for relief. To feel something, anything. She once said in an interview, "I was crying out for help, but in the wrong ways." It wasn't dramatics, it was survival. And the more she spoke up, the more she was painted as unstable. The difficult one. The princess with too many emotions. Sarah knew. Maybe not all the details, but she could see the change, the sadness, the weight Diana carried. She remained a quiet presence, checking in, staying close. But the royal wall was too high to climb, even for family. Diana didn't want pity. She wanted to be heard, to be understood. But the palace had no room for that. Vulnerability didn't fit the brand. And the woman inside the crown was left to fight her battles alone. At the height of her fame, she was admired by millions. But at the height of her suffering, she had no one. Not even the man who promised to love her. By 1992, the fairy tale had unraveled so far, it could no longer be hidden. And Diana, cornered, silenced, and exhausted, made a decision that would explode behind palace walls. She didn't go to war with Charles in public. Not yet. She simply told her story. Or at least, let someone else tell it for her. The book was called Diana, Her True Story by journalist Andrew Morton. On the surface, it looked like another royal exposé. Bold claims, anonymous sources. But this one was different. The details were too precise, too raw. It described Diana's eating disorder, her self-harm, her suspicion of palace betrayal. It painted her not as fragile, but as deeply human and deeply isolated. The world was stunned. People couldn't believe Diana would expose herself so publicly. But what most didn't know, at least not at first, was that Diana had secretly cooperated. She gave Morton access to tapes, recorded confessions she whispered into a recorder in Kensington Palace, smuggled out through trusted intermediaries. She was done pretending. The palace panicked. The image they'd spent over a decade building had cracked wide open. For the first time, the public saw Diana not just as a princess, but as a prisoner. Then came the tapes. Not hers, his. In late 1992, a series of intimate phone recordings between Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles were leaked to the press. The content was graphic, vulgar, embarrassing. The future king had not only been unfaithful, he'd been reckless. The scandal was so massive, it earned its own name, Camillagate. Suddenly, Diana wasn't the unstable wife. She was the betrayed one. But the pain didn't stop. In her own private video diaries, filmed by her voice coach Peter Settlin, Diana spoke openly about falling in love with someone else, rumored to be her bodyguard. She described how he was chucked out of the palace, dismissed without warning. That relationship, if it ever existed, was shut down fast. Because while Charles was allowed discretion, Diana was expected to remain controlled. These tapes were never meant to be seen, but they were real, and they revealed just how trapped she truly felt. Every word confirmed what the book had already suggested. Diana was screaming into a system that refused to hear her. Sarah, again, stayed quiet. The scandals were piling up. The media frenzy was unstoppable. But behind the scenes, Diana was already planning her exit, not just from the marriage, but from the institution that had stripped her identity piece by piece. She was no longer waiting for rescue. She was preparing to rescue herself. By the time the divorce was announced, there was nothing left to protect. Not the marriage, not the image, not even the silence. It was December 1995 when Queen Elizabeth stepped in. Not with affection, with instruction. Letters were sent to both Charles and Diana, formally requesting they end the marriage. It wasn't a suggestion, It was an order from the throne. The spectacle was over, and everyone involved knew it. Diana had already gone public. Her BBC Panorama interview aired weeks earlier, watched by over 20 million people. Calm, steady, and heartbreakingly honest, she spoke of affairs, of pain, and of palace politics. And with one line, "There were three of us in this marriage," she sealed the public sympathy forever. Charles had already admitted to infidelity. Diana had revealed her own struggles. The monarchy, desperate to save face, needed to contain the chaos. A clean break was the only option. Negotiations were quiet, clinical. Diana lost the title Her Royal Highness, a move widely viewed as punishment. But she retained the name Princess of Wales. More importantly, she kept her dignity. She would no longer bow to Charles, but her sons would still bow to her. The settlement was substantial, a lump sum of £17 million and an annual allowance of £400,000. She signed a confidentiality agreement. No interviews, no tell-all books. The palace wanted her quiet. They didn't want more damage. But Diana didn't need to speak to remain powerful. She already owned the public's heart. Sarah remained present, but low profile. She supported her sister from behind the scenes, helped with the children, kept the media at arm's length. While others scattered during the scandal, Sarah stayed near. After the divorce was finalized in August 1996, Diana found herself untethered. No longer a royal, but still watched like one. No longer married, but still expected to behave like a Windsor. She was free, but not really. She was still a target, still a headline. And yet, something shifted. She looked lighter, her eyes clearer. She began focusing entirely on her humanitarian work. AIDS awareness, landmine victims, homeless shelters. She traveled alone, spoke without palace scripts, touched lives that royalty often ignored. The world no longer saw her as a tragic figure. They saw her as something much harder to define, her own woman. But freedom came with a cost. Diana no longer had royal security. She turned it down herself, perhaps out of pride, perhaps out of a need to distance herself from the system that crushed her. But that decision, in hindsight, changed everything. The fairy tale was officially over, and Diana, for the first time, was writing her own ending. It was supposed to be a break, a quiet escape from the headlines, the whispers, the cameras. Just a few days in the south of France. Sunlight, sea breeze, and silence. That's what Diana wanted, what she needed. And Dodi Fayed, charming, wealthy, attentive, offered her exactly that, at least on the surface. The press followed them from the start. Photographers camped outside hotels. Paparazzi chased their car convoys through Mediterranean towns. The world had never seen Diana like this, laughing, lounging on yachts, unguarded. But the freedom was an illusion. Behind every smile was the tension of being hunted. Even from a distance, the media wouldn't let her go. Diana knew it. She told her friends she felt watched. She told Sarah. In one call from the yacht, she reportedly said she believed the boat was bugged, that someone, somewhere, was listening. Was it paranoia? Or did she know something we didn't? On August 30th, 1997, Diana and Dodi landed in Paris. Just one night, that's all it was meant to be. Dinner, a quiet hotel stay, then back to London. But that night would become the one the world never forgot. They left the Ritz Hotel just after midnight, trying to dodge the paparazzi by slipping out the back entrance. Their driver, Henri Paul, was a hotel's security manager, not a trained chauffeur. Reports say he had been drinking. The car sped through the Pont de l'Alma tunnel at over 100 kilometers per hour, chased by photographers on motorbikes, hounded until the very last second. The crash was instant. Dodi and Henri Paul died on impact. Diana was alive, barely. Emergency services arrived, but the damage was irreversible. She was taken to Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital. Surgeons tried. The world waited, and at 6 a.m., the announcement came. Diana, Princess of Wales, was gone. She was 36. Sarah flew to Paris with Charles and Jane to bring her sister home. She was the one who helped retrieve the body, the one who stood quietly at her side as the nation broke in two. There were no words, no answers, just a silence so heavy it felt permanent. To this day, the questions haven't stopped. Why was she in that car without proper security? Why was the driver allowed to take the wheel? Why wasn't she wearing a seatbelt? But perhaps the most haunting question of all came from Sarah herself. She always wore it, Sarah said later. Why didn't she that night? There's no answer. Just an ache and a sister left to carry the weight of a loss too deep to name. For nearly 2 decades, Lady Sarah McCorquodale said nothing. She refused interviews, avoided headlines. She didn't argue with conspiracy theories, nor did she try to validate them. But in the few moments where she has chosen to speak, one sentence has never left the public's mind. She always wore a seatbelt, Sarah said. Why didn't she that night? It wasn't just confusion, it was disbelief. Diana was religious about safety in cars. Friends, family, staff, all confirmed it. She buckled up without fail, even in short drives, even in back seats. So why didn't she fasten it in the one-car ride that would end her life? That question has never been answered. It sits in the center of every theory, every investigation, every documentary. And Sarah's voice, soft, steady, adds a chill to it. She wasn't just a witness to the aftermath. She was a trusted voice in Diana's life. If anyone would know her habits, it was her. But Sarah said more than that. She revealed in testimony and interviews that Diana called her just days before the crash. From the yacht, anxious, paranoid, convinced she was being watched. She said the boat felt bugged, that the walls weren't safe. It wasn't the first time Diana had expressed fears like this, but it was the last. The paranoia didn't come out of nowhere. Diana had been under constant surveillance by paparazzi, by tabloids, and reportedly by governments. American agencies later confirmed they had files on her. British authorities launched inquiries. Still, nothing official ever pointed to foul play. But unofficially, the suspicions have never died. There were whispers about the driver, Henri Paul, about his blood alcohol levels, his connection to intelligence services, even suggestions that the crash was staged. Others blamed the paparazzi, who relentlessly followed her, flashing cameras even as she lay injured. And some went deeper, suggesting she was silenced, that her relationship with Dodi Fayed threatened the royal image or the future of the monarchy. Sarah never fed the rumors, but she never dismissed them either. Her words were careful, intentional. She didn't claim to know what happened, but she made it clear. Something didn't feel right. That unease, coming from the person Diana trusted most, reignited a fire in the public. It wasn't just mourning anymore. It was doubt. It was suspicion. It was unfinished business. Lady Sarah never became a whistleblower. She didn't write a book. She didn't sell her story. But in just a few words, she did something no royal ever dared. She said what millions were thinking, that something about that night still doesn't add up. Maybe we'll never know what really happened that night in Paris. Maybe there was no grand conspiracy. Maybe it was just a tragic chain of mistakes. A reckless driver, a chase that went too far, a seatbelt that for once wasn't fastened. But when Lady Sarah spoke, she didn't offer closure. She didn't claim certainty. What she gave us was something far more haunting: doubt. She had stayed silent for years. Out of grief? Out of loyalty? Out of fear? Maybe? But when she finally spoke, her words echoed louder than any headline, because they didn't come from the press or the palace. They came from Diana's own sister, the one who saw her break, the one who brought her home. Sarah didn't accuse anyone. She didn't demand an inquiry. She simply asked the question the world had been too afraid to say out loud. Why did everything feel wrong? Today, Princess Diana's legacy lives in the people she touched, in hospitals, landmine fields, AIDS clinics, and classrooms, in her sons, William and Harry, in every person who ever looked at her and felt seen. But for her sister, it's different. Sarah carries a different weight: the what-ifs, the guilt, the silence. And now, after all these years, the question isn't just what happened to Diana, it's what happens to the truth when it's spoken too late. If you believe Diana deserved better, drop your thoughts below. And if the truth was buried, Someone still needs to dig it up. Subscribe for more untold stories.